Welcome to Arundel Castle. In particularly, welcome to the Fitzalan Chapel. Now, the building that I'm standing in has its origins over 500 years ago, when the third Earl of Arundel, a man called Richard Fitzalan, he decided that he wanted to petition the Pope to build a chantry here, part of a college, a religious community, to celebrate masses for himself when he died and also his family, and eventually would become the burial site then for the Fitzalans at the end of the 14th into the 15th centuries. Sadly, he never actually made it here. He was actually buried down in Lewes Priory, but his grandson was one of the first people to be buried here. So the building itself is actually on the foundations of a much older building, and we know that there's evidence going right the way back to 1085, where we know there was a religious community here. By 1094, that community had actually attached itself to a Norman priory, and the community then was established not only to look after the religious well-being of the town, but also for the poor and the sick. And there was a hospital attached also to this building as well. In time, this building, the community who were here, suffered quite heavily under the Black Death. By the 14th century, really, this community was in a bit of decline. So by the Earl saying to the Pope, "I would like a chantry here," it actually gave a bit of a boost not only to the building, but also to the religious community who was here. Why did he petition the Pope? Well, he actually was petitioning for a divorce or an annulment of his first marriage, which had been contracted. And although there were children by that marriage, he decided that he had actually fallen in love with somebody else. In fact, a woman who was connected directly to what would have become the royal family, a lady by the name of Eleanor. So we're standing in what would have been the most holiest part of the chapel. To my right would be the high altar. And the building itself, if we were standing here in the 14th or 15th centuries, would be in a riot of colour. We look in churches today and we see very much plain whitewashed walls. However, from a religious community who were dealing largely with people who were illiterate, then the way that they could get the message across regarding faith and being faithful was having pictures on the walls. So this would be a riot of colour. All the walls have been painted with different religious scenes and motives and religious characters. And if you go into the parish church of St Nicholas, which is the other part of this building, then you'll still see medieval paintings up on the walls there. So when we look at this building, this is a very toned down version of what would have been here. The architecture of the building largely is 14th and 15th century, and we're dealing with these large windows with lots of stained glass. Predominantly much of that is now restoration in the Victorian period. But imagine then that this building was designed to show off light, but also with colour as well. Remember, this is the most holiest part of the building. So Richard III Earl wasn't actually buried here. He died before the chapel was completed and was buried down at Lewes Priory. His tomb can be found in Chichester Cathedral. The effigies can be found in Chichester Cathedral. His son sadly lost his head in the time of Richard II, so he wasn't buried here, although his remains eventually were removed to the chapel. So it would be his grandson, this gentleman here, this is Thomas, and he was the first person to be formally buried here with his wife. Although the chapel suffered very, very badly in the time of the English Civil War, then eventually, after 200 years of being in a very sorry state in the Victorian period, the chapel was partly restored and then carried on with restorations in the next 150 years. The roof in particular had been repaired and replaced. So we're standing now in the mausoleum which was actually added to the chapel, and this is Henry the 14th Duke of Norfolk and his wife Augusta. It just shows that today this is still the burial site for the Dukes of Norfolk and formerly the Earls of Arundel. How then did the Howards as Duke of Norfolk take over the Earldom of Arundel and also then ended up being buried here rather than Norfolk? It's all to do with marriage. The Duke of Norfolk's married into the Earldom of Arundel, the Fitzalans. Combining the two, the titles then carried on with them. The titles move with the person, they don't stay in the location. So the chapel today is still a place of rest for the Dukes of Norfolk. Catholic masses are still held here throughout the year for the people who are buried here. It's separated, this is the Catholic end of the chapel, whereas the parish church of St Nicholas is Church of England, and it's the only division within the Christian church of a building that I certainly know of in this country, where you have what would have been the high altar as Catholic and the remaining part of the church as Church of England, with a screen separating the two. Today, even though the chapel is in the grounds of Arundel Castle, it is actually an independent trust, and although the Dukes of Norfolk are still buried here, it very much has to stand on its own 2 feet, so to speak. So any donations that go into the coffers here over at the chapel go back directly into just keeping this building standing and in good working order. What I wanted to do really is just give you an idea of what was actually here in this building, a snapshot if you want. What I have noticed when I've been working over here is that people walk into this building and within 2 minutes can have actually walked out. There are guides over here and the guides are exceptionally knowledgeable, so wherever you are in the castle, and particularly if you're over here in the chapel, please ask questions, because there is such a rich history, not only with the building but also the people who are buried here, that I think it's very, very easy to miss if you just don't take the time to have a look around.